for 9/11 Truth. AE 9/11 Truth now numbers over 1,600 architects and engineers and 14,000 others, all demanding a new investigation into these catastrophic structural failures. Our speaker has presented to over 150 packed audience of 1,000 to 3,000 people, whose worldview may have been irrevocably altered by this myth-shattering information. He's a personal source of inspiration to me, and I consider him to be a beacon of truth, a patriot, and a friend. Please give a warm Tempe welcome to Mr. Richard Gage.
Thank you. You are way too kind. I thank you guys for your courage tonight. I mean, you're the ones who have come and have been willing to reconsider the extremely difficult subject of the destruction of these 3 World Trade Center towers on 9/11, with a staggering loss of life, of course. You know, just as architecture and engineering projects have been they're sometimes quite difficult, sometimes extremely joyful, this particular project has been one of the most difficult. But not difficult in terms of coming to conclusions at all, as you'll see, but difficult in terms of the implications of those conclusions and finding people like yourselves who are open-minded and willing enough to review the science-based forensic evidence, to look at the facts. So our commitment tonight to you is to speak the truth and to leave you with extremely valuable information that will help you determine what is science and what is conspiracy. Our task is not difficult tonight, but please check out every fact that you hear. After all, we're not looking for believers. This is not some kind of new religion. Check out these facts yourself and come to your own conclusions. After all, 9/11 precipitated a whole host of events. We're living in a post-9/11 world. Everything changed. We've launched 2 major wars, and we've lost many of our valuable civil liberties. Time magazine reports that up to 36% of Americans want a new investigation. Why? We'll find out tonight. They say it's not a fringe phenomenon, but it's a mainstream political reality. Another poll finds that up to 16% of Americans believe that the Twin Towers were brought down by explosives as opposed to jet plane impacts. Let's find out where we are in the group tonight. First of all, I'd like to ask you 3 questions and ask everybody to vote for one of them. How many of us believe the official story? How many of us are unsure? And how many of us believe maybe already that the Twin Towers were brought down by explosive demolition? First of all, the official story. Jet plane impacts hit the towers. Large explosion of jet fuel. Fire started, softened the steel, and we have a gravitational collapse all the way down to the ground. That's the official story. No reason to believe otherwise, unless we've done a lot of research here and there. But how many of us are pretty much there? Believe the official story. We have just one tonight. And how many of us are unsure? You've heard a few things. You're here to check out the rest. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And Jaya, where are you? Jaya. You're writing these down for me? Thanks. And how many of us may already believe the Twin Towers were brought down by explosive demolition? The rest of you. And Pam, we'll get a complete count tonight of the full seats. You guys, why didn't you bring your friends who don't believe you? Oh, you've lost those friends already? Is that what it is? They won't talk to you. I know.
Sick of hearing about him.
I know. Sometimes it's like talking to a wall, right? That's what we're going to break through tonight, that wall of denial in ourselves, because we're all carrying still a little bit of it. We can't believe the implications of what we're talking about tonight. NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, is of no help in that regard. They claim early on that they found no evidence for explosives in the residue. Explosive residue in the debris piles. Later, a year later, they acknowledged that they never looked for it. I mean, they publicly acknowledged, how can you find what you're not looking for? Obviously, you can't. Well, thousands of others looked for it, and it wasn't hard to find. We've been speaking about it in 30 American cities in 23 foreign countries to groups from 100 to up to 3,000 now. And these are not conspiracy theorists. These are technical and building professionals. Almost 1,700 who have signed our petition so far. By the way, how many engineers do we have tonight in the group? Engineers? 1, 2. And how many architects? Any architects? So 2 engineers. Great. And how many normal people? All right. Good. Any firefighters in the group? Firefighters? Okay. Thanks. Petition signers, if you've already signed the AE 911 Truth petition, a whole bunch of you. Great, thank you. The rest of you I'll be encouraging to do just that, and you'll see why in a moment. What we're going to do is apply the scientific method. This is something we learned in grade school, or 7th grade, and it teaches us to winnow error from truth. We've had it for 100 years. We ask a question. What brought down the Twin Towers? We do some background research and make some observations. We construct our best guess, a hypothesis, as to how they came down. Make predictions based on that hypothesis and test it with experiments. If the data, upon analyzing the results and drawing conclusions, if that data is corroborated, the hypothesis is corroborated by the data, we report the results in an open, transparent manner so all can come to some common understanding and build on that understanding for future work. This is the way the scientific method works. It's actually quite good. We'll be testing NIST to see how they did relative to this hypothesis. As you can see already, without testing for explosives, they're off to a miserable start, and it gets worse. So let's apply the scientific method relative to our problem tonight. First, examining what are the forces that destroy buildings. Okay, let's do some background research. Fires destroy buildings. Here's how they do it. It's a chaotic event, or an organic process. Fire moves through a building in a given area every 20 minutes or so, moving on looking for fresh new fuel sources. So when a building does collapse due to fire, and by the way, they never steel frame high-rises or any high-rise has never collapsed in history due to fire. Although there have been 100 examples, at least, of hot, large, and long-lasting fires in these buildings. So, but say in a wood frame building, like this one, we would have large gradual deformations. The building would fall asymmetrically. It would fall over to the path of least resistance. And not straight down through the path of greatest resistance, as we'll be looking at in a moment. We have several examples of very hot, large fires here in Los Angeles. On this screen, burned 3.5 hours over 5 floors. In Philadelphia, burned 18 hours over 8 floors. And Richard, you're giving us a shadow there. Sorry. And then in Venezuela, 17 hours over 26 floors. None of those came down. But, well, so keep this in mind. This is important information. As is an organic process, a natural process of buildings, in this case earthquakes, cause these buildings to fall over. The structural system is not broken up into its individual components. The concrete is not pulverized to a fine powder. Keep this in mind as well. This is our background research. Explosions destroyed these buildings. We have thick, billowing, enormous clouds of pyroclastic-like smoke with entrained pulverized solids expanding in rapidly moving plumes shaped like cauliflower due to the very hot gases produced by the explosives. It's a very common characteristic of explosives. If you have this characteristic, you know you had explosives. If you have witnesses that hear the explosions, they see the flashes of light, you know you had explosions. Keep this in mind as well. as we compare these characteristic features to the Twin Towers and to the third skyscraper that we're going to be talking about that collapsed on 9/11. Now, explosions can be harnessed to bring buildings down quite efficiently. These are controlled demolitions, and we have hundreds across the country from which to make our comparison, because it's the most commonly used method to bring down high-rise buildings. So this is what a high-rise looks like when it's being demolished with explosives. So normally the purpose of a controlled demolition is to remove the structure while avoiding damage and to adjacent structures, and to do so economically. So what they do is place thousands of cutter charges, explosive charges, throughout the columns and beams in the building, and then detonating them in a very precise order, starting with the interior structure, progressing outward and upward, synchronized floor by floor. And so destroying the interior columns first allows the unsupported weight to pull the exterior inward, so it falls like a house of cards without damaging other buildings. And destroying the building from the ground up allows the weight of the building to do most of the destruction. So the result is an implosion, producing a vertical, symmetrical collapse at nearly freefall acceleration into a consolidated rubble pile that's broken up and ready for loading and shipment. Now, this is a feat that only a handful of companies in the United States are even capable of. Fire doesn't do this to buildings. Can't. So, we have all these characteristic features we just went through. It's all direct evidence of explosive destruction, and guess what? Fire can't account for any one of them, let alone all 10 of them. So, with additional supporting evidence like government documentation, experts agree it's a controlled demolition. Foreknowledge, those experts, by the way, that don't have a bias, who aren't paid by people who have direct benefit from those not being called a controlled demolition, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. And foreknowledge, these are planned months in advance, so some people know about them. And video documentation, all of this is proof beyond a reasonable doubt of controlled demolition. Now let's apply those characteristic features to Building 7. How many of us are almost unfamiliar with Building 7? How many of us don't know much about the Building 7 at the World Trade Center? 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so this is important because I didn't either when I started in on this, and yet it is the third worst structural failure in modern history. You would think all architects and engineers would be studying it scrupulously, and yet most of them, including myself 6 years ago, did not know anything about it. It was the third skyscraper to collapse on 9/11, and it was a football field in length away from Building 7, wasn't hit by an airplane, so it's a great test case to find out what happens to high-rises when they're on fire and they're not hit by airplanes. How do they behave? Or how are we told that they behaved? So let's find out. This building was taller than any building in Phoenix, about 4, 5, 6 stories taller than the tallest building in Phoenix. So imagine what's going to be happening to this building, happening to your tallest building here in Phoenix. It got hit by some of the beams from the North Tower, but NIST said that those beams didn't do the damage that caused the collapse. And you can see the building here standing after the towers had collapsed earlier that morning. At 5:20 in the afternoon, this building sustains a major catastrophic failure, and we'll show that to you as we compare the characteristic features of controlled demolition to this building's destruction. Let's begin and see if there is a sudden onset of destruction at the base of the structure. Let's listen to Daryl, a medical student, interviewed that evening on New York radio.
We were watching the building actually because it was on fire. The bottom floors of the building were on fire, and we heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. Turned around, we were was what looked like there was a shockwave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out, and it was horrifying. Then, about a second later, the bottom floor caves out, and the building followed after that, and we saw the building crash down all the way to the ground.
The building crashed all the way to the ground, windows busting out, a sound of a clap of thunder, and then the building started coming down. So it's this phenomena occurring and then seeing the building coming down. Not the building starting to collapse and then creating all of this. We'll hear this theme again and again from these witnesses. Let's take a look at this collapse, which may be our first look at the destruction of Building 7, narrated by Dan Rather.
What you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself. Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building. It's amazing. Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before. A building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
Here's Dan using his intuition. Looks like I came down by well-placed dynamite to knock it down. Okay, so we've all seen the old hotels in Las Vegas. So this is fairly intuitive. We expect Dan to be telling us what he thinks. The problem is we've never seen this building come down after 9/11, even though it was such an incredibly catastrophic failure that engineers have been wrestling with and arguing about ever since then. Why doesn't the media play this? Well, maybe we'll have a chance to see in a moment. Do we have a straight down symmetrical collapse into the building's footprint? Let's take a look from West Street. Penthouse come down first. Well, let's bring it back and take another look. That penthouse is dropping a half a second prior to the overall building, and in 6.5 seconds that building has dropped all the way to the ground from top to bottom. Interesting. Well, I'm not convinced yet though. Let's take a look and see if what it looks like adjacent to a known controlled demolition on the right, Building 7 on the left. Is there any similarity? Is there enough similarity to warrant an investigation into the possible use of explosives? Fascinating. Probably so. And yet we're told by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, that these fires, brought that building down in the fashion you saw. Is that possible? Let's take a look. These are the worst fires, the one you just saw and these, that we have photographic or video evidence of. Just so you know what we're dealing with. And what they say, NIST, is that this column failed, and that brought the whole building down. Interesting. Well, here's what happens. According to their theory, these beams expanded, pushing this girder off of its seat on this column. That caused this floor to fall on this one, and this one, and this one, and so on, leaving this column unbraced, and it buckles. You have an internal cascading failure, and then the overall building comes down. That makes no sense for at least 18 reasons. Those are the fact that there was no fire on this floor for an hour prior to that happening. So these beams couldn't have expanded, and even if they could have, well, they wouldn't have, because even if there was a fire there, these beams are fireproof. They don't expand when they're fireproof. They're insulated from fire. That's why they're fireproof. Even if they could have expanded, they wouldn't have, because they're tied structurally to the slab above. How did NIST manipulate this situation? They applied all the heat in their computer model to this beam in 1.5 seconds. That's fraud. That forced the beam to expand axially and, in their model, break these shear studs. They didn't apply any heat to the concrete up above, which would have expanded or kept the expansion from happening. And it wouldn't have pushed this girder off of its seat, because that girder, according to the construction documents here, have a structural shear stud tying them to the concrete slab up above. But even if it could have walked off, it wouldn't have caused the failure of this floor, because there are other girders that are tied into the top of this column that would have kept this floor from falling on this one and onto this one. But even if that could have happened, it wouldn't have, because this floor wouldn't have fallen all the way flat on this floor, causing a major dynamic load to cause this one to fall on the next one. It would have hung probably in mid-air if it fell at all around this column. So it's just ludicrous. But even if that could have happened, you wouldn't have had the inside cascading failure without major telegraphing on the exterior perimeter structure with massive deformations and indentations and bulging on that exterior perimeter structure. So it makes no sense. And again, these fires here on the 12th floor are out by the time that all is supposed to be happening. They're out prior to an hour before this building comes down. Now, this is their computer model. What are we seeing here? A number of things. In their justification of their theory, this computer model actually betrays it. It shows us that they're causing the instantaneous failure almost of 400 of these structural steel connections per second in order to bring this building down. In their theory, an overall of 30 seconds or so, or 16 seconds. What else are we seeing? No massive bulging. Well, we're seeing the top begin to tip over, and it doesn't look anything like the actual video destruction. So they can't even get their computer model to justify what happened in reality. And they stop it about 2 seconds prior to 2 seconds into its collapse. They won't even show us what happens after that. They have the video footage from their animation, but they won't show it. Why? Because the building's behaving nothing at all. It begins to tip over. They can't even get it to go down straight. It's a real problem for them. This is what we would have expected in a natural collapse, and they do have this going on in the bottom of their computer animation, but it's not what's happening in reality. And the building, the center of the building is in the center of the pile. A nice, clean, straight down, symmetrical collapse. How do we get that to happen? Well, we have to remove all 80 columns on each of 8 floors almost all at once, within a tenth of a second of each other on each floor. This is incredible precision. Is fire capable of that precision? No. Again, firewood is an imperfect organic process, would have gradual deformations. It would fall over. How fast is the building coming down? Well, it falls at free fall acceleration. Now, NIST actually acknowledges this after being forced into humiliation publicly by members of AE 9/11 Truth, which said this is easily measurable and demonstratable. It fell at free fall. And they go, oh yeah, you're right, in their final report, but they don't acknowledge the implications. Let's look at the implications. This is a brick. I'm going to drop it. It's going to fall. How fast does it fall? Let's see. 3, 2, 1. It falls at free fall acceleration. Why? Because there is no resistance underneath it. Save a tiny little bit of air. And so, what does that mean? There's 40,000 tons of structural steel resisting Building 7. And it's designed 5 times stronger than it needs to be in order to hold up this building. Where did it go? Instantly, almost all of it vanished. How does that happen? Fire? I don't think so. And they're totally dismembered. We had a 47-story structure that has been disintegrated, dismembered, individual structural elements down to 4 stories. This was a moment steel frame resisting building where the columns and the beams are integrally welded in order to resist deformation of the building laterally in high winds. This is an incredibly strong structure. So we have complete dismemberment of those strong connections. Remember, buildings that fall due to natural processes, we don't have the dismembering of every structural steel element from each other. So we have a building, you know, what's recognizable as a building at the base, not a pile of dismembered components. Do we have sounds of explosions heard by witnesses? Well, let's listen to this whistleblower from the New York Police Department, Craig Bartman.
And the whole time you hear boom, 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 boom. So I think I know an explosion when I hear it. You know, I was real close to Building 7 when it fell down, and I don't know, but that didn't sound like just a building falling down to me while I was running away from it. There's a lot of eyewitness testimony down there hearing explosions. I didn't see any reason for that building to fall down the way it did, and a lot of guys should be saying the same thing.
Well, they are, and here's another one. Former Air Force medic, Kevin McPadden, first responder on the site.
And then it was like another 2-3 seconds. You heard explosions, like boom, and it's like a distinct sound. It's not like when the compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. That, to me, I knew that was an explosion. There was no doubt in my mind.
Well, none of these witnesses or these explosions are a part of the official story. And there are many, many more, as you'll see. What happened to them? NIST investigated thousands of photographs, hundreds of witnesses. Why didn't they include in their investigation these witnesses of explosions? Do we have enormous pyroclastic-like clouds of pulverized materials? Let's listen. Watch. Radiating away in every direction from the collapse of this building at 35 miles an hour is this incredible expanding cloud due to some incredible heat source in these cauliflower-shaped manners indicative of explosions, which is a chemical reaction due to the explosives. This is extraordinary. Far more heat than the fires, the few small fires that you saw in this building. Where's that heat coming from? Well, it would be cutter charges, and we'll be looking for evidence in the debris of those cutter charges when we get to the next section. But so far, these 8 characteristic features is direct evidence. There are direct evidence of explosive destruction, and fire can't account for any one of them, let alone all 10 of them. Why? Well, let's look at a fire. This building, World Trade Center 5, was definitely on fire, definitely fully engulfed. As NIST claims, World Trade Center 7 was. Did it come down? No. Steel frame buildings are fire protected. They don't come down due to fire. But this one did due to these small fires in 6.5 seconds. Interesting. And completely destroyed. What about the FEMA report? The conclusion is the specifics of the fires in World Trade Center 7 and how they caused the building to collapse remain unknown at this time. Wait, this is the final report that they had. $600,000. They don't know how the building came down? It gets worse. The best hypothesis, fire plus random damage, has only a low probability of occurrence. They don't think the fire brought the building down. But that was their conclusion, even though they have no faith in it. They say further research, investigation, and analysis are needed to resolve this issue. Unfortunately, for those hoping to resolve the issue, though, the steel, 99% of it, was removed illegally and sent to China for recycling prior to the report coming out, which said, hey, we're not sure how this building came down. Maybe we should look at the steel, but it's gone. No, it's just gone. Prompting Bill Manning, editor-in-chief Crucial evidence could answer many questions is on the slow boat to China. Editor-in-Chief of Fire Engineering Magazine, the communication vehicle for fire protection engineers. The chief editor, showing an astounding ignorance, he says, of government officials to the value of a thorough scientific investigation. The destruction and removal of evidence must stop immediately. It wasn't. They sold to China for something like $100 a ton. Expert corroboration. Who agrees with this? Well, here's the top European controlled demolition expert, Danny Jowenko. What does he say? Starts from below. They've simply blown away the columns. It's a controlled demolition. A team of experts did this. Professional work, without a doubt.